General Mark A. Welsh III is the Associate Director for Military Affairs, Central Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C. He serves as the Principal Advisor to the Director of the CIA on military matters and is the primary bridge between the CIA and the Department of Defense for the coordination and planning of military and interagency operations. Additionally, he assists in the formulation of CIA policies regarding military affairs, manages the provision of direct support to deployed forces, and oversees the Director of CIA's representation at the combatant commands and senior service schools. General Welsh was born in San Antonio, Texas, and entered the Air Force in June 1976 as a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy. He's been assigned to numerous operational, command, and staff positions. Prior to his current assignment, he was the Vice Commander, Headquarters, Air Education and Training Command at Randolph. General Welsh is a command pilot with more than 3,200 hours in the F-16, A-10, TG-7, and T-37 aircraft. Please stand and join me in welcoming Lieutenant General Mark Welsh.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it very much. Everybody sit down. Thanks. I'll come join you. How you doing? Who gets out of here Friday? Yeah. Time to roll. It's good to be here. 8 o'clock in the morning. We don't know this speaker. What if he sucks? That's why I'm down here, so I can wake you up if you start to doze on me. Thanks for letting me be here. And a special thanks to Mark Simon and Spear for inviting me. I'm here to talk about leadership, which is not a surprise to you because everybody wants to come talk to you about leadership. I don't know how many leadership speakers you've had, but let me compare my credentials to theirs. I have none. I don't know anything more about this topic than you do. The important thing is that we talk about it, and that's why I'm here today, to have a conversation with you. I believe very strongly that if you're going to be successful in the United States Air Force as an officer over time, then you should spend a lot of time where you're stupid. And this is one area where you are going to be stupid. I promise you. Sometime with some people in some situation, you're going to be a leadership idiot, and I've got the scars to prove it. So let me tell you how I learned some of the lessons that I think are important to you. None of this will be new to you. Some of the stories will have different faces and names than the ones you have experienced, but you'll nod your head at some of these things, okay? But these are the ones you're going to be reminded of over and over and over again. I have a son named Matt. Matt was 17 years old the first time I had a leadership talk with him. He's 23 now. Matt was a meathead then. He's a meathead now. But he's a great kid. And I had this big talk that I have with lots of young officers who've worked with and for me about leadership and the importance of stepping out and taking the lead and running programs and stepping away from the peer group and taking responsibility on. I just gave him that old Matt, you got to be willing to lead speech. And when I finished, he did what you probably did when you were 17. He looked at his dad and said, why? Because 17-year-olds are serious smartasses. They rank up there about, they're at the top of the scale for smartasses. You guys, unfortunately, are only number 3. Lieutenants and captains on the global metrics rank about number 3. Generals rank number 2, and 17-year-olds are clearly number 1. And I couldn't think of a real clever answer to give Matt. Except it matters. Let me show you a video. Can we stop that video for a second? Thank you. And just back it up to the video, but don't run it yet. This is a video that you've seen hundreds of probably in your life already. It's a retirement ceremony for a great Air Force NCO. And it's not a fancy video. It's taken by somebody in the crowd in about the third row. And all they're doing is filming a friend of theirs at a ceremony. But just watch it, and we'll talk about it. Can we try running that thing again?
Gives me the honor and privilege to carry my country's flag forward in battle. It's a rare thing for a person to find a job and career that gave them great, great joy. Every day, I loved coming to work. And after a short period of time, I gained a great sense of purpose in what I did. And I think now that those days are coming going in for me. That's probably what I'm going to miss the most. This wonderful family, and this great sense of purpose. And I hope to take it with me, and wherever I go. Thank you.
Anybody really listen to the words? If you're like me, you probably didn't hear the first half. I typically don't when I watch a video. Let me tell you that I didn't tell you the whole truth there. This isn't really a retirement ceremony. It's really an award ceremony for a guy named Staff Sergeant Matt Sladen. Matt is a member of the 56th Civil Engineering Squadron at Luke Air Force Base. He's an explosive ordnance disposal technician. He had just returned from his incompleted third tour in Iraq doing EOD work. He is personally responsible for having defused 65 IEDs. Who knows how many lives that saved? He was on his 148th combat mission when he walked up to an IED he thought had been defused, was doing an inspection of it as the team lead, and it was remotely detonated. What you can't see in that video is that Matt Sladen does not have a left arm. It was blown off by the bomb. What you can't see in the video is that he does not have a left eye. It was blown out by the bomb. What you can't see in the video is that his right eye is completely destroyed. He cannot see at all. And what you can't see in the video is the horrible scarring on his face and neck that he experienced from that blast. What you can see, if you look closely, is the pride. I'm going to run it one more time, and I'd like you to listen very closely to the words. Next slide, please. And can we run this video?
I'd like to thank the Air Force for giving me the honor and privilege of carrying my country's flag forward in the battle. It's a rare thing for a person to find a job and career that gave them great, great joy. Every day, I loved coming to work. And after a short period of time, I gained a great sense of purpose in what I did. And I think now that those days are coming going in for me, that's probably what I'm going to miss the most. This wonderful family, and this great sense of purpose. And I hope to take it with me, and wherever I go. Thank you.
Matt Sladen deserves leaders. Any argument with that? And that's what your job is in the United States Air Force. It's not to be a great technician, although it's really important to you that you are. It's not to do really well on the ORIs or to write really good performance reports, although that's important. It's to lead. And for the rest of the time you're in this business, that's what people are going to look to you for. You need to understand that this leadership stuff is a bit of an extreme sport. But you can't win if you don't play. Some of you are already at the All-American stage. You've been doing this for a long time. And others haven't even stepped on a playing field yet. You decide for yourself which group you're in, and then adjust if you're in the second one, if you want to be successful. There's lots of courses on this topic. There's lots of books. You hear a lot about it in the courses you're in right now. There are leadership majors in universities around the country. You can get a master's in leadership now. You can get a doctorate in leadership in some places. There's corporate leadership, there's military leadership, there's academic leadership, there's books, everybody has an opinion, and so do you. And this is what they teach you. All these things on that list. Leaders do these things. So I'm not going to talk about any of these. Let me tell you a couple of things they don't talk about in the classes, and that the books don't say, and that you experience by developing scar tissue. I think I fully understood that when I stepped away from the crowd and tried to take responsibility for an issue or an office or a group of people, that it would be harder than just being one of the guys in the back of the room. So it's hard. I didn't realize how hard it would be. I didn't realize I was going to lose time doing the things that I like to do. Less time with my kids, less time playing sports, less time relaxing, less time whatever you want to do. I didn't realize that I'd be frustrated because I couldn't do enough that I wanted to do as a leader. And even on those days where I thought I had it right, and you've had those days where you work 14, 16, 18 hours, you feel like you made a difference to the mission, you took care of your people, you made a difference in somebody's life, and you go home at night, and you walk in the door, and you do the, honey, the leader's home. Have you tried that yet? I don't highly recommend that. Because when you do it, something like this happens. You look at your spouse. This is my beautiful wife, Betty, here on this slide. And she says something along the lines of, what about us? When are you going to start leading this organization? When are you going to start taking care of the people you're supposed to care the most about? I haven't seen you in 2 weeks. You have no idea what the kids are up to. When are you going to lead us? Folks, that's a terrible moment. If you haven't experienced it yet, you're going to. So let me stop right here and make something real clear to you. Do everything in your power to keep this from happening. Make sure you have your priorities straight. My number one priority above everything else, if you take religion out of the equation, is my family. I love you guys, but not like I love them. And I should make time in my life for them. I should prioritize them ahead of other things every time I can. They understand there's going to be times I can't. My wife signed up for that. My kids didn't. They just kind of got sucked along in the vortex. But they've dealt with it. And they'll tell you there's lots of pluses to life as a military dependent as well. But make sure you understand where your priorities lie, okay? You won't be much good to the United States military, the United States Air Force, if you're constantly fighting the battle of not paying attention at home. Nobody told me that trying this leadership thing would hurt. This is not like you get a rash. It's not like I got a sprained ankle. I'm talking about bone deep hurt. That's a picture of a guy named Mike Chinberg. We called him Chins. Chins was a lieutenant in my squadron when I was in F-16 squadron back in 1990. When our squadron went to the Gulf War, Chins stayed home because he was scheduled to get married. And we thought we were going to go over there in a couple of weeks and we'd be coming home. Nobody knew if a war was really going to happen. And so Chin stayed back, and he and April got married and went on their honeymoon. I hadn't met April, but I felt kind of bad for her that she just finished her honeymoon, got settled into a new house, and then her husband had to leave to join us in December of 1990. Shortly thereafter, about a week before the war actually started, we were doing some night training up near the Kuwait-Saudi border. And at about 10:30 at night, doing a medium altitude training mission, Mike, we think, got his flight lead's rotating beacon confused with a light on the ground. And he tried to rejoin on the light on the ground. He hit the ground about 60 degrees, nose low, inverted, going 670 miles an hour in full afterburner. I'm pretty sure he died relaxed. I think he was so disoriented he really didn't know what was happening. I doubt if dying relaxed was real comforting to his mom and dad, Pete and Ellen Chinberg, when I called them to confirm that they'd found him at the bottom of that smoking hole. Or to his wife, April, when I called her and told her that he, in fact, was dead. Now, their reaction to this didn't surprise me at all. But mine did. I grew up as a son of a fighter pilot. My dad flew fighters for 35 years. I lived in a circle of houses, 21 houses at a place called Cannon Circle in RAF Wethersfield, England, when my dad was flying F-100s. And in the 4 years we were there, 11 dads out of those 21 families died. I'd never been in a flying squadron up to this point in my career where somebody hadn't died while I was there. So it wasn't the death that shook me up, although it was horrible. What bothered me was that Mike Chinberg was my guy. I was supposed to be leading him. What did I not see in his training program that he did not do well, that if I'd corrected, he wouldn't have made the mistake that killed him? I walked out to the airplane with he and his flight lead that night. I was flying at the same time. What did I not see in his eyes that night that would have made me pull him out of the lineup and allowed him to be sitting here with us today? His death was my fault. That's how I felt. Still feel that way. You know, the day Mike left to fly over to join us, I called April up. Hadn't met her. I introduced myself on the phone and said, April, I'm sorry that Mike has to leave you so quickly, but, you know, the nation needs him. Or some other corny line like that. I said, but don't worry, I'll bring him home safe to you. I lied to her. If you try and lead, the pain is coming. You just need to know that. Here's something else you need to know. If you're responsible for something, if you're the one who takes the leadership and you've got the issue, the organization, the people working for you, nobody else cares about it as much as you do. You guys need to understand that. Because when it first hits you, it's very frustrating when you finally do figure this out. You've got phenomenal people who are going to be working for you. They're unbelievable. And they care an awful lot, but they don't care as much as you do. Nobody in this room cares as much about SOS as Spear does. Nobody in here cares as much about ASBC as Mark Simon does. Just a fact. It's going to be a fact for you too, and it's going to frustrate the hell out of you when you realize your people don't care as much as you do. Just understand it. It's okay. Here's a big one. I always thought I was a pretty nice guy. Most people like me. Some people don't. They don't like me at all. Because I'm trying to lead them. Some of them think they should have gotten the job I got. Some of them think I'm making decisions that don't benefit them. Some of them just like to bitch. You know them. They're sitting in here with you. They don't need any good reason to not like you. They just won't. Deal with it. Nobody told me they wouldn't like my wife either. She's really nice. They don't like my kids. The guy flying that airplane right there is a guy named Glenn. Glenn was flying with my squadron when I was in that Gulf War, the first Gulf War. I'm parked about where this crew chief is looking right here. It's about the angle this camera was at. Glenn pulled into the parking spot right across from me. I looked up, and what you can't see is on his right wing there's a missile that's missing. He had fired an AIM-9 infrared missile here somewhere during this sortie. This is the second time Glenn had come back from a combat mission with a missile gone. The first time I grounded him for 3 days, and he had to brief the squadron on how he was going to change his switchology so this didn't happen again. Because it wasn't like we were swarmed with enemy fighters or anything. We hadn't even seen one on radar. So I got out of the airplane, I walked over to Glenn and gave him the, what's up with this? And he told me about how he'd been coming off the target, and he just dropped his bombs, and a surface air missile went over his head, and anti-aircraft artillery rounds were going off around him, and he just kind of panicked and accidentally hit the pickle button again, and the missile flew off. Now, technically that's not possible, the way he described it, but I thought, okay, heat of the moment, he just doesn't remember exactly what happened. He panicked, not good. So I said, Glenn, this won't surprise you, but you're grounded. We'll talk tomorrow. That night I went and grabbed his tape and looked at his tape. What really happened is that there weren't any surface air missiles flying over his head. There wasn't any AAA going off around him. He came off the target. He couldn't see his flight lead. So he went into an automatic acquisition mode of the radar, which locked onto his flight lead, who was climbing above him about 5,000 feet in front of him in full afterburner, going through about 30,000 feet to get back away from the target area. And with that AIM-9 missile now looking right where the radar is locked, hungry for a heat source, from 5,000 feet behind a flaming afterburner, he accidentally launched a heat-seeking missile. Now, the probability of kill, the fighter guys in here will tell you, for that missile is about 90-some%. And purely by a stroke of luck, his flight lead went into a cloud as the missile was off the rail. And then the missile lost the heat source and went stupid. Guy should have died. So I told Glenn he was not flying any more combat sorties in my squadron because I wasn't willing to write this letter home when it happened a third time. Yeah, he was not happy. He went home from the war. Shortly after he left the Air Force, Glenn didn't like me. Glenn's wife didn't like my wife. Glenn's kids didn't like my kids. About 3 years ago or so, Glenn built an experimental airplane, was flying it, and crashed and was killed. I don't know anything about what happened that day, but I know that when he woke up that morning, he still hated me. You want to lead? Everybody's not going to like you. Get ready. A couple other things. And these are things you know, but they're going to be reiterated to you over and over and over again, so I just want to talk about them for a minute. I don't care what your job is. I don't care what task you've been given. I don't care what organization you're in charge of. If it's your job, if it's your responsibility, do it your way. Give it your style. Don't do it like you saw somebody else doing it. That won't work for you. Don't try and be your last boss. It won't work for you. If you're comfortable with people and you have an easygoing style, don't try and be the hard ass. It ain't going to work. Neither will the opposite. Give it your style, your personality. Be yourself. It's good enough or you wouldn't be here. This is really important. There are no books that tell you what to do. You're going to run into situations constantly, just like you have up to this point, where there are no easy answers. There is no black and white script. Trust your gut. You can trust your gut. I trust your gut. Why shouldn't you? If something feels like the right thing to do, it's probably the right thing to do. If something doesn't feel right to you, no matter how many people are telling you should be doing it, if it doesn't feel right, it's the wrong answer. Don't do it. I actually tell people who work for me sometimes, we're not going to do that. I don't have a great reason. It just doesn't feel right. And they think I'm nuts. But I can tell you this. I can tell you on one hand the number of times in the last 10 years that I have done something that didn't feel right to me. And usually it was because my people convinced me that I really should do this, and I wanted to support them, so I said, okay, let's do it. Every time, it was wrong. Every time. And usually my boss would get it and go, what are you thinking? And my boss was right. I wasn't. Trust your gut. This sounds pretty simple. You know what you stand for, right? If I asked you to stand up right now and give me in 3 sentences what you stand for, could you do it? Sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? It's really not. The best investment of time I have ever made in my military career was before I became a flight commander. One of my branch chiefs on the flight line, a great master sergeant, said, hey, you need to know this. You need to be able to stand up in front of your people, starting with your first meeting, and say, here's the things Mark Welsh stands for. and what he won't stand for. And it needs to be simple, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be easy for people to understand and remember. That all sounded pretty easy, so I tried to write them down. If you haven't done this drill, grab a beer or whatever you drink, and a piece of paper and a pencil, and sit down in your apartment or your room one night and just try writing this out. You'll use it from now till the time you leave the military service, and then you'll use it in your civilian job. It won't be as long as you think. It'll be pretty straightforward, and I promise you it will help you more than it helps anybody else. You got to know what you stand for. The second half of that sentence is really important because I assure you, when you take a leadership role or you take a position of leadership, within 2 weeks of you taking that position, somebody is going to put their hand in your chest and they're going to push you back to the line that you drew in the sand. And then they're going to try and push you over it. And if you step back and cross that line, you're done leading. I promise you, it's coming. Not like that guy. You want to be credible like that guy right there. That's my son Matt, when he was 7. These are the Fort Hunt Lakers, the world's greatest 8- and 9-year-old basketball team. Guy on the left is a guy named Mike. Mike's a Navy Admiral now, and Mike and I coached the Lakers. This was the pinnacle of my coaching career. The only reason I coached is because Matt was 7 at the time, and I was afraid he was going to hurt 6- and 7-year-olds, so to get him into the higher league, I had to coach. So I did. Matt's a wild man. I told you he's a meathead. He hasn't changed. When he was 7 years old, Matt was kind of the heart and soul of this basketball team. Number 33 there was one of the guys on the team. His name was Thomas. Thomas was the only kid who didn't come from the same elementary school as the rest of them did. Because Thomas had ADD. He really had it. Thomas's dad called me and asked if he could play on our team because he didn't want him playing with kids who knew him. Found out later the kids in his elementary school really picked on him in a serious way. They called Thomas Bunny, which was short for Energizer Bunny. Because Thomas couldn't stand still. He kind of vibrated all the time, and when he had a basketball in his hands, he'd do one of these things. He'd eventually just kind of vibrate into a traveling call, and we'd turn the ball over. The week before the first game of the season, we finished practice, and Thomas said, "Coach, can I talk to the team?" I'm going, "Sure, motivate us." So Thomas very seriously stood up in front of all the guys, and he explained how we were playing a team from his elementary school, led by the best player in the league, the giant 9-year-old who was the scoring champ, who was also Thomas's number 1 tormentor at school. He's the one who came up with the name Bunny. Thomas was terrified. And he just wanted the team to know that he probably wouldn't play very well, which shouldn't have been news to him, because he was really nervous about this game. And when he was done, Matt stood up, and Matt came about to Thomas's waist. So he put his arm around his waist, and said, "Thomas, don't worry, they're not going to say anything to you when I'm around." I'm going, "That's my boy." It was pretty funny. Game time shows up. I put Thomas in the starting lineup, give him a little street cred with his peeps. So he walks out to center court. He kind of vibrates his way into the circle for the jump. And the referee's got the ball in his hand, getting ready to toss it up, and this big kid, who's also playing center as it is on the other team, walks into the circle, and he sees Thomas kind of shaking, and he turns to the rest of the guys on his team. He says, "Hey guys, look at Bunny vibrate." And Matt went Rambo on him. No kidding. He took him down. He is pounding on this kid right there in the middle of the court. The kid is screaming and covering up his face. And everybody is just standing and looking at it. The referee's got the ball in his hand doing this, and I'm on the sideline in shock. And finally the official picks up Matt, and Matt's swinging. And he turns and kind of walks him over to me, and I grab him and throw him in a headlock. Sit him on the bench, and Mike's holding him down. Matt's still yelling. It was horrible. We hadn't had the first game of the season yet, and my son's thrown out of the game. We get ready to start the game up again, and Thomas heads back into the center circle, and this time it's like John Wayne walking out there. And he's walked into this circle, and the other kid comes walking in, he's looking a little shaken. And Thomas goes, "He's still sitting right over there." Matt's got credibility. You better have that same kind of credibility. I'm running away with slides. Your people look to you to mean what you say. If you tell them you're going to do something, if you tell them you're going to follow up on an issue, if you tell them that you're going to take care of a problem that they have, you better do it. If you don't, you're done leading. You get one chance. Matt's 23 now. He graduates from Texas A&M in May. He wants to play professional rugby. That's his goal. He's bigger now. He's meaner than hell. He's still got credibility. If he tells you he's going to kick your butt, run. You're going to lead lots of people over the course of your career. None of them listen the way you talk. So they all can adjust their listening style to understand you, right? No. That doesn't work. Everybody you've ever had who's tried to communicate with you has had some varying degree of success based on how you hear them. And all kinds of things go into that. When they talk to you, where they talk to you, what their body language is, how they read your body language. It's all part of communication. And you need to understand that you need to start figuring out how to speak in about 1,000 different languages if you want to communicate with all of them. It's hard to find the sweet spot. But that's your job, not theirs. Just make sure you think about that when you start trying to communicate with them. Just read this one. Now read it again. This is really important. I'm at a table with a capstone group. All the SESs and 1-stars and all the services are traveling around the world in their world tour. I'm assigned to STRATCOM at the time. I'm sitting at a table at a dinner with the commander of Strategic Command, General Jim Cartwright at that time. I'm there as one of his staff guys, and there's 6 capstone fellows, so they're all new 1-stars or promoted 1-stars. During the course of dinner, while the 4-stars carrying on this conversation with them, every one of them, at least once, checked their BlackBerry. The first staff meeting I went to at Air Education and Training Command when I became the vice commander, the 4-stars at the end of the table were talking about the most important stuff the command does day to day, and there's people checking BlackBerries. You can imagine my response. Email is a very, very important tool. You need to know how to use it well. It is not a leadership style. It never will be. You can't command and lead this way. So I don't care how technologically oriented you are, don't make this your primary tool. You'll fail. It's that simple. Even if you're leading technical people. You ever figured that since you had the title, or since you're the flight lead, or since you've got the office chief job, that you're the best at whatever it is you guys do? Yeah, get over this one too. I've had the opportunity to lead lots of people and lots of organizations, and I got to tell you, I have never been the best at anything, anywhere. Your people are better than you are. Some of them are better than you, all of them are better than you at something. Some of them are better than you at lots of things, and there are a number of them who are better than you at everything, including leadership. Don't let this surprise you. Don't let it intimidate you. Look at it as this unbelievable opportunity to take all these tools you never had before to use against your problem now. Lady in the picture's name is Peggy. Peggy was a lieutenant at Kunsan when I was the wing commander there, was where this picture was taken. Peggy started her military career as an Army military policeman. It's a private in the United States Army. I bet she was a good one because she's tougher than nails. She showed up at Kunsan one week. I was at the club on a Friday night. We just finished a big crud tournament. Somebody came up and said, "Hey, Wolf, you met the new nurse yet?" Because she just graduated from nursing school, took a commission in the Air Force. New nurse at Kunsan's a big deal. So I said, "No, I haven't met her." They said, "Yeah, she threw Sergeant Smith out of the hospital today." Well, that's really a big deal at Kunsan. Sergeant Smith was kind of a legend there. He'd been there, and he's on his third tour at Kunsan, which I'll tell you something. Third consecutive tour at Kunsan. He was a med tech. He was a staff sergeant with about 20, 21 years of service, which should tell you something else. Great medical technician, not so great of a non-commissioned officer. And Peggy had walked in her first shift, running the night shift there at the hospital, took a look at Sergeant Smith and said, "Sergeant Smith, I've heard you're a phenomenal medic. I can't wait to work with you. I'll be excited about having you on my team once you look like a professional." Get out of here. Man, big news at the Kun. So later that night, I went down to the hospital to meet her. As I'm walking in the door, by the way, to his great credit, Sergeant Smith came walking in right next to me. He's got on a new pressed set of BDUs. He's got shined boots, and he's got the worst haircut you've ever seen in your life that his roommate had just given him with a pair of scissors. But a week later, we had a young Army private who was part of the Patriot Battalion, the Surface Air Missile Battalion there at Kunsan, got a letter from home. This kid was probably 18 and a half, 19 years old. He was a farm kid from somewhere in Minnesota. He'd gotten married to his high school sweetheart right before going on a remote tour. Since this train wreck, he'd just gotten a letter saying, "Dear John, I need a divorce. I've just moved in with your best friend. I've discovered he's my soulmate." Ouch. And this young guy had gotten a hold of something to drink. I don't know what it was, but he drank a lot of it. I should tell you, he's a gigantic kid. I mean, he is a huge kid. It took 8 cops to subdue him once he got completely 3 sheets to the wind. I heard that on the brick. I went, "Oh, great." They'd taken him to the hospital, so I went scrambling down to the hospital. It's in the evening sometime, and I walk in there, and Peggy's team's on the shift. I said, "What happened, Peggy?" She kind of gave me the rundown. They brought him in. They had to tape him to the bed, sedate him. And so he's now unconscious, in the emergency room there in his bed, and she's fuming because she called the doctor half an hour ago, and he's not there yet, and I'm thinking, glad I'm not the doctor. And I walked in to talk to Sergeant Smith and the gang, and I'm standing there, and they're kind of here like the front row is, and I'm talking to them about what's going on, how they treated him, and behind him on the bed is this kid. And the first thing I noticed when I walked in was, damn, he's bigger than the bed. He's gigantic. And he's lying there with his arms out, and they've cut all the tape off him because they taped him down. He's got tape hanging off his arms, and it was just a horrible situation. But he is dead to the world. So as we're talking, I'm in the middle of one of these sentences, and all of a sudden behind him, this kid sits up. Now, Peggy's gone off to call the doctor again, so she's not there, but the gang's still here, and I'm talking to him, and I just kind of stopped talking. And his eyes are about this big, and he swings his legs to the side of the bed, and he kind of fumbles to his feet, and he's flailing his arms around, and he comes up with a pair of scissors that I guess were from the tape. I don't know, but he's got them in his hands. And by now I'm saying really intelligent stuff like, and as this guy starts kind of doing the monster walk around the bed, these guys all see my eyes go like this. They turn around, and they had the same thought I did, which is, we're going to die. And so he's stumbling toward us, and we're doing one of these things. I have no idea what we're going to do. And they're all lined up here in front of me, and I'm right behind them, leading. And about now, Peggy walks back in the side door. And she looks at us, and we look at her, and she looks at him, and we look at him, and it was kind of a bad movie there for a minute. And then she takes off, and she hits him from the side and takes him out, over the bed, onto the floor. Then I led the troops in and we subdued the perp. I wouldn't have done that. I never would have done that. She's not only smarter, better looking, she's braver than I am. How do I lead Peggy? How do you lead her? When I left the emergency room that night, she's sitting there on the floor. He's wrapped up in those leather, restraints they put on him in the fetal position. And she's got his head in her lap. She's stroking his hair and telling him it's going to be okay. How do I lead that? Your problem now. Biggest issue you get into as a leader is your people come back to you with a solution to something you told them to do, and you don't like it. Maybe you get frustrated with them, and you let them know that. You ever had a boss who's done that? Lots of bosses do it. Everybody does it sometime. Here's what I've learned. 99.9% of the people you're going to work with in your career are trying to do the right thing. If they didn't get it right, it's because you screwed up. In my case, it's because I didn't give them the right guidance, I didn't give them the right priorities, I didn't give them the right resources, I didn't give them the right training. It's my fault. Almost every single time. So I've quit getting mad until I figure out what the problem really is. Because I got embarrassed too many times. Don't make that mistake. Everybody's trying hard. Frustration is the enemy in the leadership sport. Don't let it win. Because if it wins, you lose. I'd like to foot stomp this one a little bit. If that young airman or that young lieutenant comes running up to you as you're walking down the hall one day and says, "Excuse me, Captain, can I talk to you about something?" Do you think they accidentally ran into you? Do you think something just popped into their head on the spur of the moment? Of course not. They've been thinking about this. Something's bothering them. And if you tell them, "Hey, look, I can't talk right now. I got to get to a meeting. Hey, I just don't have time. I'll check up on you later." And you walk away from that encounter, you now have two problems. You got the one the airman started with, and you've got the fact that their leader doesn't care. Now, sometimes you really are going to something you have to be at, but make sure they clearly understand that, "I'm sorry, I got to be at a meeting with the boss in about 2 minutes. Where are you? I will come back and find you as soon as I'm out the door." That's okay, but don't give them the feeling that you blew them off. You get one chance. If you get it wrong, you're done leading. If you can do just this, folks, just this and nothing else, if you can make everybody you talk to feel like it's the most important conversation of your day, then you win. And so does your organization. And so do your people. I get an awful lot of people contact me and want to know whether or not, as they move into command jobs, just people I've known over the years, they want to come talk to me about command stuff and setting the climate, and can I get some thoughts from you? And one of the things that almost every one of them uses is this fingerprints thing. And they don't say it in public, and they're a little embarrassed about it, but they all kind of come around to, look, I want to leave my mark. I want to leave my fingerprints on this organization. Because they care. How many of you, and so by the way, what they then do is they look at strategic vision, they look at mission statements, they look at facilities, they look at reorganization. How many of you have been in an organization in the Air Force since the day you came in that hasn't reorganized while you were there? Yeah, me neither. And I've been doing it a long time. So how long do you think that new mission and vision statement, the new objectives, the new facility, the new organization, how long do you think that's going to last? Yeah, about 2 years. The only fingerprints that last are the ones you leave on your people. This is a major truth in the leadership game. So where should you spend most of your time and energy? You can answer that question for yourself, I think. Problem is, it's also the hardest place to spend most of your time and energy. It's the least comfortable place. It's the most emotional place. It's the most dangerous place. Doesn't matter. Go there. It is where you're most stupid. Always will be. For all of us. By the way, those people are affected by everything. We talked about that reorganization stuff. Change may be necessary sometimes, clearly. But it is always, underline always, disruptive to your people. So as you reorganize, as things adjust, as somebody's desk has to move from here to there, which seems like a small thing to you, there is an impact on your people. You need to sit with them and make sure you understand the impact. You need to understand their concerns about the change. From their perspective, not from yours. And you need to talk to them face to face about it. If you don't, you lose. Because it's important that you know what they care about. What they care about doesn't need to be at the top of your priority list, but you've got to know what it is. Remember these guys? The mighty Lakers? Number 10, right there in the back row, is Bishop Young. Bishop's mom called me after we'd already started practicing for the beginning of the regular season. And she said, hey, Mr. Welsh, I got your name from the league commissioner. He suggested I give you a call and ask if my son Bishop could play on your basketball team. And I said, well, Mrs. Young, we've already had the tryouts, and I don't know if I can just take him on the team or we have to let the other teams look at him. She goes, no, the commissioner said I should just talk to you. So I said, okay, well, tell me about Bishop. I said, I'm envisioning, Michael Jordan at a young age. And she said, well, Bishop's never played basketball before. And he's never been on any kind of sports team. She said, Bishop's autistic. I said, okay, I saw Rain Man, but I don't know much about autism, Mrs. Young. Can I come meet you and meet Bishop? I was having a concern about people making fun of him, and I didn't want that to happen. So I went over to the house and met Mrs. Young and Bishop's older brother, who was about 14. Both of them were phenomenal. Single mom, raising 2 kids, tough neighborhood, just a phenomenal, phenomenal lady. And I said, well, is Bishop around? After a few minutes, she goes, yeah, he's around back, and she yells Bishop. And a minute later, there's this, commotion that starts up around the side of the house, and around the corner comes this thing. It's a bicycle with one of those plastic, space motorcycle frames on it. And the kid with one of those Star Wars, stormtrooper helmets on. And he's got about 100 decks of cards in the spokes. And it's doing a thwack, 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 thwack around the corner. And he pulls up next to us and pulls his helmet off, and he's got a smile that goes from ear to ear. Unbelievably happy kid. And I said, he can play on our basketball team. And so he did. And being a phenomenal basketball coach and a great leader of young men, I knew what Bishop wanted. And so I set him up for success. I knew that he wanted to score points because points impress babes. Matt told me. And Bishop, by the way, this is the only time I ever saw Bishop without that huge smile on his face, because Matt told him that it's a team picture, you got to look tough. And look at the old mule with no lips down here in the front row. So we worked on a play so Bishop could score points. We did it every day in practice. We ran it in every game the whole season, about 2 or 3 times a game. And the old Richie, our point guard here with the double knee pads, would bring the ball up the court. I'd call the play from the sideline. Richie would roll his eyes at me. I'd yell at Richie. Matt would come up on the wing. Richie would throw him a pass. Big Will would set a pick on the baseline. Bishop would roll around that pick about 10 feet from the basket. Matt would throw him a bounce pass. About 20% of the time, Bishop would catch it. There are times that it'd go out of bounds. If he caught it, he'd turn, he'd shoot. The ball would go about 3 feet. That's all it would go. Usually the guy covering it would catch it, and they'd take off, and we'd go play defense. We ran it all year long. It worked the same every time. Playoffs come around. You guys Disney fans? First playoff game. Admittedly, our last playoff game. I wasn't that good of a basketball coach. We ran a play a couple times in the first half. It went as expected. Beginning of the second half, Bishop's in the game. Richie's bringing the ball up. I call the play. Richie rolls his eyes twice at me. I yell really loud at Richie. Passes the ball to Matt. Bishop comes around the pick by Big Will. Matt throws him the bounce pass. Bishop catches it. He turns, he shoots, and the entire gym went quiet because the ball kept going up. I have no idea why. All those synapses just kind of fired together for some reason. And the ball hit the front rim. It rolled over and went through. And the place went crazy. Both teams are high-fiving each other. Honest to God. Everybody knew Bishop by this time. Mike and I broke a couple of ribs chest bumping on the sideline. It was bedlam. And after things started to die down, I looked up to watch us playing defense, and we're playing with 4. So I scanned down to the other end, looking for Bishop posing on the baseline, and he's not there. And I look over to the stands to my left, and I realize for the first time that somebody in that gym is not cheering hysterically. Because Bishop's mom is sitting right here in the second row, and she's got her head in her hands and her head down on her knees, and she is just sobbing hysterically. And right next to her is old number 10. He's got his hand around her shoulders, and he's patting her right on top of her head. And I went, leadership lesson. Bishop doesn't care about scoring points. Bishop doesn't give a damn about basketball. He kind of likes being on the team, but that's not that important. His mom's crying, so you guys can all take a lead. This is really an important lesson. It was a big moment for me because I thought I understood people. I don't understand anything. You've got to know what your people care about. The only way you're going to know that is to know them. I'll come back to that thought. Don't believe anything the first time you hear it. Nothing. If it's bad news, get the whole story before you make up your mind how you should respond. When I was a commandant at the Air Force Academy, I had a mother call me at my house at 1 in the morning and start yelling at me. And when I finally wake up, I have to figure out what she's saying. She's basically telling me that her son, who was a cadet at the time, had just been, sentenced to beheading or something because he had called some girl downtown the B word. And she deserved it. I said, there's got to be more to this story, ma'am. Let me find out and I'll get back to you. And I got a lecture about how that was it. She talked to him. He gave her the whole truth. He wouldn't not give it to her. On and on. Well, here's what really happened. The guy went out on his 21st birthday with a couple of his buddies and did try the 21-shot thing. Really brilliant move that nobody in this room has tried, I know. He got to about number 14 before he passed out. They thought he was going to die, so they took him to a Denny's to put food in him. I heard some nervous laughter out there. There's a couple of people that had an instant kind of allergic reaction when I said Denny's. His buddies carried him in, literally carried him in with his feet doing this thing on the sidewalk. As they walked in the door, he kind of came to a little bit. There's this great big guy sitting in the stool right there as they walked in the corner. As he walks by him, he whacks him in the back of the head. That's the opening act. They go, we're so sorry, he's drunk, we got him. And they shoved him into a booth and put him against the window in the booth and slid in next to him. Waitress comes over and she's cheery, it's 3 a.m. or something, but she's happy. And how things going? Good to see you guys. What can I get you? And this guy grabs the napkin holder, the metal napkin holder on the table, and he swings his arm back. He hits the plate glass window and breaks that freaking gigantic plate glass window. That's how hard he hit it. Which collapses, cuts 2 people in the next booth, and one of his buddies in his booth. He throws the napkin holder then, hits the waitress in the head. She gets 6 stitches in her forehead. She drops like a rock. When she finally gets back up again and everybody's quit dodging glass, she says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "You, B word." So he did call her that. Don't ever believe the story is accurate until you've got all the questions answered. Sounds stupid. It will keep you out of a lot of trouble. Get all the facts. Because this is true. It's a good picture, isn't it? I've seen worse at Air Force clubs. But never forget that you are the common sense monitor. All of you are pretty good with people, or you wouldn't be here. I always thought I was, and I think I talk about leadership a lot, so I thought, I must be getting pretty good at this stuff. When I was a wing commander at Kunsan, my chief and I, Ray Mercier, were standing one time at a 4th of July picnic, and as we're standing here looking kind of up this sidewalk, we're talking, and we look up, and here comes this airman, actually a staff sergeant. And I recognize him. He's an F-16 crew chief from the 35th Fighter Squadron Pantons. And as he's walking down the sidewalk, I'm going, Chief, help me with this one. He's wearing combat boots and black socks, like knee socks, cut-off jean shorts, no shirt. He's got nipple rings. He's got a chain between them. And that chain is linked to one of those 2 or 3 inch wide black leather dog collars with big silver spikes on it. And he's got a matching wristband. He's looking good, baby. And he's got his hair shaved on one side of his head and then combed over, and it's just dyed goth black. And I'm telling Ray Mercier, Chief, find a rule here. Help me. This is just wrong. This is back before the tattoo and piercing regs were all in place. So anyway, we went over and gave him some fatherly advice, as you can imagine. He's a great kid. I was just struck by that vision. For the next several months, I flew his airplane pretty often because he was a really good crew chief, so the squadron wanted me to fly his jet a lot. Probably a couple times a month, at least 2 or 3 times a month. I saw him all the time. Just a couple nights a week, I'd just take pizzas out in the flight line and hang out, and he worked the afternoon evening shift. And so he'd always come over and talk. Great guy. And a phenomenal crew chief. Not a good crew chief, a phenomenal crew chief. Months later, I'm in the office one Friday evening. I hear a knock on the door. I look up, and in walks this crew chief being kind of drug along by his tech sergeant supervisor from the flight line. And behind him is their first sergeant, their chief, their squadron commander, and then my chief, Ray Mercier, is kind of at the end looking interested. And as I walk in the room, the tech sergeant goes, Wolf, you got to fix this. Remember that last slide? Get all the facts, figure out what's going on. So I sat down and said, what's going on? Well, it turns out he's got a daughter. Her name's Lori. She was 4 years old at the time. He was divorced. He'd been divorced right before coming to Kunsan. He had a follow-on assignment to go to Spangdahlem. Unfortunately, Lori's mom, who had custody, had just been convicted of felony drug sales and was going to prison. The only other living relative was her mother, who had just gotten out of prison as a felony drug offender. There'd been a custody battle ongoing for several months that he knew about, but we didn't know about, that he'd been trying to work through from Kunsan. The judge had decided that he wasn't going to give custody to anybody who wasn't close enough to bring Lori to see him every 6 to 8 weeks because he was worried about this little girl's future. So because this staff sergeant was going to Spangdahlem in his follow-on assignment, he was trying to work the personnel system by himself to get this fixed. You can imagine the success he was having. And the judge's final hearing was on Monday. This is Friday night in Korea. Was on Monday, and somebody who was competing for custody had to be at the hearing. Now, we can argue that he should have said something before now about all this, and you're right, he should have, but will your staff sergeants all tell you? So I pick up the phone. I made some phone calls to verify all this. Talked to the judge's staff, found out that all this was in fact true, and then called a guy named Jim Green, who was head of personnel assignments at Air Force Personnel Center at the time, and I woke him up at some ungodly hour at home and told him the story. His first question was, Mark, did you verify all this? Yeah, I did. Okay, well, what do you want? I said, I want him assigned to Luke because the judge says that's close enough that he can drive up from there. And he said, okay, when does he need to be there? Sunday? He said, okay, put him on an airplane. The orders will meet him there. Jim Green's a great American, great leader. So we did. After I gave him this lecture about what to wear to the hearing, how to get a haircut, all that stuff, he took off. Probably 2 months later, 3 months later, I'm sitting in the office, get this envelope in the mail I don't recognize. I open it up, and a note and this picture fall out. This was taken at Lori's 5th birthday party at an animal place up near Flagstaff, Arizona. He's in the picture too. He's right behind the old llama there. But he's still serving, so I took his face out of it. And all the note basically said was, I've just received full custody. Lori's not here full time, thank you. Pretty cool story, isn't it? I picked up the phone, called Jimmy Green, woke him up at some ungodly hour of the morning. I said, Jimmy, I just got a note and a picture in the mail. And he said, yeah, I got one too. It was kind of that pregnant pause, and we did the guy thing. Yeah, Roger, shit hot, yeah, out here. And I swear, very shortly thereafter, there's a knock on my door. I look up. It's dark outside. It's in the evening. And here's the tech sergeant supervisor. And he's standing at my door in the dark with sunglasses on and an envelope in his hand. And I just said, yeah, I got one too. And he just turned around and left. That's a great story, isn't it? Let me ask you the question that bugged me after all this was over. Why didn't I know about Lori? Saw this guy routinely. Talked to him all the time. Why didn't I know about this? This was a colossal leadership failure on my part. Why didn't I know? Because I never asked him. I never asked him if he had kids. I never asked about his family. Folks, if you want to lead airmen, you got to know who they are. Every one of them has a story. Everybody in this room has a story. And everybody's story is unique. They have amazing connections, family and friends. They have amazing talents. They have amazing problems in some case. And they are not going to tell you what they are unless you engage them. Just the way people work. Every airman has a story. Learn the stories, or you can't lead them. I almost cost this guy a daughter. Almost cost Lori a father. By the way, every commander between me and him had the same failure. We were saved by a great tech sergeant. When you step out there and take the lead on an issue or in an organization, you are making yourself a target, and many people will take advantage of the opportunity to practice firing. There's a whole lot of people who will critique what you do. Deal with it. Most of them want to be doing what you're doing. They want to be leading. They just don't have the nerve. But they get plenty of ammunition to use because you're not always going to be right. Don't let this surprise you. I don't care how good you are, how smart you are, how talented you are, how motivated you are. You're not always going to be right if you're trying to lead people on mission. And when you're wrong, tell everybody you're wrong, laugh about it, learn from it, and move on. Your bosses aren't keeping score. And don't you keep score on your people. Let them make mistakes. Don't make them feel bad about it. You're going to feel bad enough when you make one. Here's a news flash. Some days your best just flat is not good enough for what your organization is trying to get done. And when it isn't, Your people are going to carry you. And the next day, when their best isn't good enough, you're going to carry them. That's the way teams work. That's the way the Air Force works. Don't let this bother you. Do I need to say anything about this? Are there any questions about this one? Okay, then nobody in here is allowed to whine when you get hammered because you do something stupid. All your people should feel the same way. Make sure you say this to them, and then hold them to it, and substitute NCO, airman, any other term you want in there for officer. This business is important. You're important. What you bring to it is important. But it brings a responsibility with it. Legal, moral, ethical. All that stuff matters. You will not recover from a mistake in those areas. Because they're not mistakes. They're bigger than that. Make sure you got this firmly set in the old head, okay? I don't think there's any surprise that I wrote those words on this slide. The leadership business is all about people. If you take care of this, everything else will fall into place. Your people will take care of the mission if you take care of them. It happens constantly. You guys know that. You've been doing this. It's all about people. And if you're going to lead them, your job is to make them look good. So take that job seriously. Don't make yourself look good. Your boss knows whether you're doing good work or bad work. Trust me. You don't have to work at that. Make them look good. When I was a squadron commander during the first Gulf War, I had two great senior NCOs running my flight line for me as production superintendents. One's name was Rick McMichael. Rick just retired as a chief. There was never a question he was going to be a chief. Phenomenal guy, phenomenal performer. The other guy was a phenomenal production superintendent, but he was a crusty, nasty, unhuggable, irritable, abrasive master sergeant named Dave McGarr. Great American, tough guy to work with and for, because he demanded perfection every day. He didn't have a political fiber in his body. He was never going to be a chief. He wasn't going to be a senior master sergeant. But if you wanted airplanes loaded on time, right weapons on board, ready to launch for combat sorties, you wanted Dave McGarr running your flight line. And that's exactly where we were privileged to have him. About the second week of the war, Dave came up to me one morning as I got to the jet, like he did every morning, and said, "Hey, boss, they're all ready to go." I said, "Mac, thanks very much. How you doing today?" We started talking. He had a little flag flying on the antenna of his truck he was driving. You know, one of those little flags like that one, about this big. I said, "Hey, Mac, we're going to go strike the nuclear plant south of Baghdad today. You want me to take your flag up there?" And he stopped like I'd shot him. And he said, "You do that for me?" I'm a hell of a guy, Dave. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I took the flag off the truck and put it in my pocket and kind of forgot about it and flew the mission, came back and landed, pulled into the spot, shut the engines down, canopy came up. Tech Sergeant Manny Villa, who was my unbelievable crew chief, and I hope a chief master sergeant somewhere now. I've lost touch with Manny. Walked up the ladder and we shook hands. I told him how the baby was doing, and I followed him down the ladder, and there's McGarr. And I started telling him about the mission. And after a couple of minutes, I got that, the "hey, you idiot" look in his eyes, and I realized he didn't want to hear anything about the mission. And then I remembered the flag, and I went, "Oh, the flag." And he gave me the, yeah, duh look. So I pulled the flag out of my pocket, and I handed it to him, and McGarr took that flag just like this. And he turned and kind of, no kidding, like he's carrying the Holy Grail back to the truck. I didn't think much about that. I laughed, but didn't think anything more about that. We got back from the war, and been home about a month, and we got an invitation for my wife and I to come to Dave's apartment for dinner. I told Betty about McGarr, so we said, "Yeah, we got to go. We got to see what this is like." Yeah, he lived alone, which wasn't a major surprise. And we went into his apartment. And as we walked in the door, Betty and I were both struck. Later, we talked, and we were by the same exact thing. There were two things hanging on the walls of his apartment. Right when you walk in the door on the left, there was a Coors Light beer bottle opener hanging on a nail. And over the couch in his living room was this. That little American flag, matted and framed. The words on there say, "Flag carried on bombing mission over Baghdad, Iraq, 27 January 91, has my name and the airplane's tail number." This was the center of his life. That really struck me. When I left my squadron commander tour about a year later, we had those nice dinners where they say nice things and people give you stuff and then they kick you out of Dodge. And at the end, the MC said, "Hey, does anybody else have any comments to make?" And there was kind of a, "Yeah," from the back of the room. And everybody turned because it was McGar's voice. And he never said anything. So he came walking around the side of the room, and he's carrying a rolled up brown paper bag. And he just kind of walked up to me and gave a deeply moving and, "Here." He touched me. So I took the bag, I unrolled it, and pulled this out. And on the back, written in pencil, it says, "With my deepest respect, David McGar, Master Sergeant, United States Air Force." This is the greatest award I'll ever receive. Probably 3.5 years ago now, Dave died of pancreatic cancer. Before he died, he was in a hospital in Utah, and I got the word that he was there, and I gave him a call and had a chance to talk to him. It was a horrible conversation. He never said anything, and I didn't know what to say, so we kind of grunted at each other. And at the end, I said, "Dave, hang in there, buddy. I know you'll beat this thing." We both knew I was lying. And afterwards, I got ready to hang up, and right before I hung the phone up, he said, "Hey, boss, you remember that flag?" Oh, yeah, I remember the flag, Dave. He said, "Would you take care of that for me?" Oh, you bet your ass. And before I'm done, I'm going to tell the whole Air Force about this flag. And about the guy it represents when I look at it. I look at any flag now and I see Dave McGar's integrity in the white stripes and his courage and commitment in the red and his loyalty in the blue. And in every one of those stars, there's a face of some airman he taught how to do the job right. He never, ever, ever, the whole time I knew him, talked about anything he did. It was always about his airmen. And he talked them up constantly. I have never seen a prouder group of people working for a supervisor. It wasn't an accident. He understood that your job is to make others look good. Here's what I believe our Air Force needs in leaders today. I think we need you to stand for something. I think we need you to say what you think, not what you think your boss wants you to think. When somebody asks for your opinion, give it to them. Don't pull any punches. I want you to keep the righteous wrath. In other words, when you see something wrong, fix it. Don't just bitch about it. You got to respect your people. You got to trust your people, and you can't be afraid to tell them that. Be willing to communicate openly with everybody. Your people, your commanders, your peers, your coalition partners, the press. I don't care who it is. We've got a great news story to tell. Tell it. We need leaders who care and who aren't afraid to show that to their people. And most importantly, we need people who aren't afraid to lead, who don't worry about how hard it is or how much it might hurt or how much people might not like you. Because it matters. The nation needs you right now. You know that. You guys have been to all the ugly places. If you haven't, you're going to be. The Air Force needs you. Jason needs you. Anybody know this face? This picture was taken shortly after Jason left the United States Navy. He and his wife Teresa were both petty officers in the Navy station at Rota, Spain. Jason had just completed some of the physical training applications for the Navy SEALs and had passed. Shortly thereafter, he decided he didn't want to be a Navy SEAL because he decided this. This is taken from an interview in Airman magazine. So he left the United States Navy and he re-enlisted the United States Air Force, applied to and was selected for pararescue training. In 1999, he entered PJ school with the other 1% who were going to graduate with him, or 9 of the 10% who would graduate from that course. And 2 years later, he did graduate and was assigned to Moody Air Force Base in Georgia as a member of the 38th Rescue Squadron. Not too long after that, in early 2002, he deployed to Afghanistan and was at Bagram with the rest of the 38th Rescue Squadron supporting combat operations in Afghanistan during Operation Enduring Freedom. Most of you have heard or studied Operation Anaconda. About the third day of that operation, which wasn't going too well, a Navy Special Operations team, a team of 6 SEALs, was being repositioned to serve as an observation team on the side of a mountain called Takur Ghar at the Shaikat Valley in Afghanistan, because it overlooked the battlefield there of Anaconda. During that insertion, the helicopter was hit by rocket-propelled grenade and machine gun fire from an enemy force they didn't know was there. Hydraulic lines in the back of the helicopter were burst. The helicopter pilot snatched the thing away from the rocks on the side of the ridgeline in order to avoid a crash landing, kind of wheeled off down the valley and crash landed about 4 or 5 miles up this valley. During that violent maneuver near the ground, one of the Navy SEALs, Senior Petty Officer Neil Roberts, who had already disconnected evidently for the anticipated landing, was thrown out the back of the helicopter. The last thing anybody saw of Petty Officer Roberts was a Predator video of him charging up the hill with his machine gun twinkling. He was wounded, captured, and executed. The other SEALs in the helicopter, of course, didn't know this, so after the crash landing, they radioed back to headquarters, got a second chopper, they were picked up, they were reinserted on the mountain to go find their buddy once they'd figured out what had happened. They hit the ground along with an Air Force combat controller named John Chapman. Tech Sergeant John Chapman also died on the mountain that night, earning an Air Force Cross for his heroism and keeping his team alive by supporting it with air power. But from the time they hit the ground, they were fighting for their lives. About the time they hit the ground, the rescue force launched out of Bagram. 2 more CH-47 helicopters. Each had 16 Rangers, a special ops medic, 2 Air Force pararescuemen. On the first of those helicopters was 26-year-old Jason on his first combat sortie. When they got to the ridgeline, now named Roberts Ridge, for those of you who heard of that, they were also hit by enemy fire. Their helicopter crashed on the side of that ridgeline. Both pilot, co-pilot were injured. Waist gunners were firing to keep the enemy at bay. One of them was killed almost instantly. Took them a while to get the back of the ramp down to get the Rangers out of the back of the helicopter. First 3 or 4 Rangers out the back were also hit by enemy fire and either wounded or dead. And so almost instantly we had the Alamo. For the next 4 hours, Jason and the other PJ and the Army Special Forces medic took care of 7 wounded soldiers and sailors in the back of that helicopter until the helicopter, which, as you can imagine, was a bullet sponge on the side of that mountain in the dark, eventually caught fire. Jason and one of the other medics put together a little sled made out of materials in the back of the helicopter, and he took all 7 of those wounded soldiers and sailors one at a time across this withering field of fire. Enemies within 100 yards, and he moved each one of them through the deep snow to a safer location. Enemy would reposition, they'd have to move them again. They did that 3 times. After the second time, the Army Special Forces medic was wounded twice in the abdomen. He became one of the wounded. Jason moved him a 3rd time, and after the 3rd move, he was bending over, checking an IV on one of the wounded soldiers, protecting him with his body when a round went in under his body armor on the right side, crossed his pelvis, and tore him up really well. Now, our PJs are pretty darn good medics. He had to know exactly how badly he was injured. But for the next couple of hours, he continued to treat now 10 wounded people. The other PJ on the mountain that night describes the trail he left in the snow of his own blood as he drug himself from patient to patient. Late in the afternoon, Jason started to fail. Impossible to get a helicopter in during the daytime and lose another crew. So they treated him as best they could. About 4:30, 5 o'clock in the evening, they started doing CPR on him. They tried for 25 minutes. When they realized it wasn't going to have an effect, the ultimate realists live on the battlefield. They turned to the other wounded who they thought they could save. And at about 8 p.m. on the 4th of April, 2002, lying in bloody snow, freezing temperatures, 10,000 feet up the side of a mountain, 9,000 miles from his wife Teresa and 2 young daughters, Senior Airman Jason Cunningham died. Treating men he'd never met before that day. Serving a cause that he didn't imagine when he was growing up in New Mexico. The guy's a hero. Lots of heroes on the mountain that night. This is from a citation for the Air Force Cross. All 10 of those wounded soldiers and sailors lived. Pretty awards. Gave him a great funeral at Arlington. These words are from his buddy Scott, who was the other PJ on the mountain that night. Another hero. He was where guys needed him, and he was saving lives. I would imagine Jason is pretty proud of these words. But I doubt if they did much for his wife, Teresa. Maybe these did. I want you to know I died a happy man. Happy that I got to do what I wanted to do. Are you ready to lead him? I hope so. There's thousands of airmen just like him. They're all over our Air Force. They're your responsibility. Let me leave you with this. There's lots of great thoughts on leadership, and I encourage you to go look at all of them. This is a quote from a dumpy 2-star who's been doing this a long time, who's now become a 3-star by some stroke of incredible luck. Leadership is a gift. It's given by those who follow. You have to be worthy of it. Are you? I ask myself this question every morning as I get out of the car to walk in the building. Some days I don't like the answer much. And when that happens, I slap myself a couple of times and I get back to work. While you may not like the answer every day either, I would highly recommend the question to you. Thank you for what you do for our Air Force. Thank you for who you are, your talent, your commitment, your sacrifice, the leadership you're already providing. Thanks for your decision to serve. And thanks for all those people who you will continue to lead. I'm awfully proud to wear the same uniform and do the same business as you do. And I'm awfully lucky to be here with you this morning. Thanks for giving me the time. Take care of yourself. Thank you, sir. Thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me, bud. Thank you.